What if I told you that the Garden of Eden described in Genesis was not the only Eden mentioned in the Bible? What if, long before Adam was ever formed from the dust of the earth, another Eden existed, a celestial garden on the holy mountain of God, a capital city of an angelic kingdom? And what if its king was Lucifer himself? For centuries we have been taught to read the story of our origins as a simple, linear narrative. But the ancient texts, when read with careful eyes, reveal a far more complex and staggering truth, a story of two Edens, two gardens, two falls. Most people read the scriptures and are taught to smooth over the difficult verses, to treat the apparent contradictions as mysteries of faith. But you are here. You are here because you sense that history has pages that have been torn from it. That the official story is not the complete story. You are not just curious, you are searching for the source. This journey will not just be about the fall. It will be an archaeological expedition into the location of the fall. We will uncover the forbidden geography of Lucifer's lost kingdom and distinguish it from the earthly paradise that was given to Adam. Once you understand the reality of the two Edens, the entire biblical narrative of rebellion and redemption will snap into a new and brilliant focus. Before we pull back this cosmic veil, be sure that you are subscribed and have enabled notifications. The truth that the early church forgot is about to be remembered. Our investigation begins not with a forbidden text, but with a riddle, a profound and deeply perplexing verse embedded in the heart of the canonical scriptures themselves. The 28th chapter of the book of Ezekiel contains a lamentation, a divine oracle delivered against the king of Tyre. While the prophecy begins as a condemnation of a human, earthly king, it quickly transcends the historical and launches into a description of a being of far greater antiquity and glory. And it is in verse 13 that our central clue is found. Addressing this mysterious, majestic being, God declares, "You were in Eden, the garden of God." For centuries, this single line has been a source of immense theological debate. How could this figure, universally understood by both Jewish and Christian tradition to be Lucifer before his fall, have been in the Garden of Eden? The garden, as we know it from Genesis, was created for Adam and Eve. Lucifer appears there only as the serpent, an intruder, a tempter. The timeline does not fit. The narrative seems to be in direct contradiction. This is the historical tapestry upon which our mystery is woven. The traditional reading forces us to choose. Either the Eden in Ezekiel is merely a poetic metaphor, or the Genesis account is incomplete. But what if there is a third option? What if the riddle is not a contradiction at all, but a revelation? What if the Bible is not speaking of one location, but two? The riddle in Ezekiel is not a flaw in the text, it is a doorway, an invitation to uncover a lost piece of cosmic geography. It is the first thread that, when pulled, will begin to unravel the entire simplified story we have been told. To grasp the significance of two separate Edens, we must first transport ourselves back to the spiritual atmosphere of that primordial age before the first act of rebellion had occurred. In that timeless state of perfection, the realms we now think of as separate, the heavenly and the earthly, were not estranged from one another. They were distinct, yes, but they were deeply interconnected, two different expressions of the same unified divine order. Imagine a universe where the will of the Creator was the only law, and that law was executed with a flawless, frictionless harmony. The spiritual atmosphere was not one of faith, for faith requires the possibility of doubt. It was an atmosphere of pure, unadulterated knowing. The presence of God was not a distant concept to be believed in. It was the self-evident reality, the very air that all beings, both spiritual and, in the case of the first earth, physical, breathed. The spiritual climate was one of perfect, synchronous worship. Every star moved in its appointed course, every angel served in its appointed rank, and every created thing fulfilled its appointed purpose without question or hesitation. This was the lost perfection. It was a universe of complete transparency, where the barrier between the dimensions was as thin as a veil, and the glory of the Creator flowed unimpeded through every layer of His creation. It was this perfect, harmonious state that was about to be fractured, not just once, but twice. But it is into this pristine narrative of perfect harmony that the shadow of a human question inevitably falls. As a seeker, as one who reads the sacred texts with a discerning heart, a persistent question begins to form, a question about the very nature of the places described in the Bible. What is the true geography of these sacred spaces? When the Bible speaks of Mount Zion, is it only a physical hill in Jerusalem, or is it also a spiritual reality in the heavens? When Jacob dreams of a ladder reaching from earth to heaven, is it just a dream, or is he being shown a real, functioning intersection between the dimensions? When the book of Revelation describes the New Jerusalem descending from heaven, is it a metaphor, or is it a literal celestial city that will one day merge with the physical earth? This is the shadow in the heart of every deep reader of Scripture, the question of sacred geography. Are these holy places purely physical, purely spiritual, or are they, in some mysterious way, both? This question is not a distraction. It is the very key that unlocks the mystery of the two Edens. For we have been taught to think in flat, one-dimensional terms, to place Eden only on the physical map of the earth. But the ancient Hebrew mind did not see the world that way. They understood that reality was layered, that the physical was a reflection of the spiritual, and that there could be, and often was, a heavenly reality and an earthly counterpart. And it is this very understanding that allows us to solve the riddle of Ezekiel. The primary obstacle to uncovering this profound, multidimensional truth is not a sinister conspiracy, but a long and well-intentioned historical process. The opposing force in our investigation is the gradual simplification of biblical cosmology by the later church. As the early Christian faith grew from a mystical Jewish sect into a global religion, its leaders and theologians were faced with the monumental task of creating a clear, defensible, and easily teachable doctrine. In the turbulent intellectual environment of the Roman Empire, where they battled against complex Gnostic heresies that spoke of multiple heavens, eons, and demigods, a simpler model became a strategic necessity. The rich, layered, and often bewilderingly complex worldview of the ancient Hebrews, with its heavenly courts and multidimensional realities, was deemed too dangerous, too easily misunderstood, and too similar to the pagan mythologies they were fighting against. And so, a great flattening occurred. The Church Fathers, in their wisdom, chose to focus on the core, essential doctrines of sin and salvation. The intricate details of the cosmic geography were downplayed, spiritualized, or allegorized. And in this process of simplification, the concept of two distinct Edens, one celestial, one terrestrial, was one of the first casualties. It was far easier and theologically safer to conflate them, to merge all biblical references to Eden into a single earthly garden. This was not an act of malicious deception, but of pastoral pragmatism. But in their effort to make the faith simple, they unintentionally made it smaller, and in doing so, they forgot a great and powerful truth. Our investigation now begins in earnest, and our primary text is not a forbidden scroll, but the canonical, inspired scripture of the prophet Ezekiel. The fateful whisper that launches our journey is the divine oracle itself, the lamentation over the king of Tyre in the 28th chapter. Let us listen to it not as a vague allegory, but as a precise historical testimony. The prophecy begins by addressing an earthly king, but the language quickly escalates, transcending any mortal ruler. You were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty, the Lord declares. This is not the language used for a human king. This is the language of a primordial creation. And then comes the fateful whisper, the verse at the heart of our mystery. You were in Eden, the garden of God. As we have established, this cannot be the Eden of Adam. The timeline is impossible. This being existed and fell before the human story began. Therefore, this verse is not a contradiction. It is a clarification. It is the Bible itself testifying to the existence of another Eden, a different Eden. And the verses that follow provide a detailed, almost geographical description of this celestial paradise. It is not a place of trees and rivers. It is a place of mineral and metaphysical glory, a realm of precious stones and fire, a sanctuary that is not on earth, but on the very holy mountain of God. The whisper has been spoken. There are two Edens. And now we must begin the work of mapping the one that was lost. Let us now embark on a wilderness journey, an act of sacred archaeology, as we excavate the description of this heavenly Eden from the text of Ezekiel. The prophet provides two key geographical markers that distinguish this celestial realm from its earthly counterpart. The first marker is its location. The text says of this being, "You were on the holy mountain of God." This is a profoundly significant phrase. In the cosmology of the ancient Near East, and indeed throughout the Bible, the mountain of God is always a reference to the center of divine government, the place where heaven and earth meet, the cosmic axis mundi. Mount Sinai was a temporary mountain of God. Mount Zion in Jerusalem would become its earthly reflection. But the original, the true mountain of God, is in the heavens. This Eden was not a garden planted on a terrestrial plain. It was the capital city of the cosmos, situated on the very peak of God's celestial mountain. The second marker is its composition. The Eden of Adam was a world of soil, water, and organic life. It had trees, fruits, and rivers. But the description of Lucifer's Eden is entirely different. It is a world of mineral and energetic glory. Every precious stone was your covering, the text says, listing a dazzling array of gems. This is not a description of a biological environment. It is a description of a throne room, a sanctuary built not of wood and stone, but of light and fire. The text confirms this with the next phrase. You walked back and forth in the midst of stones of fire. This is not a garden you can till. This is the very heart of a divine furnace, the supercharged environment that immediately surrounds the unveiled presence of God. This is not a paradise, this is a power plant. Before the storm of rebellion broke, there was a profound calm of perfect, holy function. And in that calm, Lucifer was not a king, he was a priest. The text of Ezekiel gives us his specific, official title, and it is the key to understanding his role within this heavenly Eden. He was, the scripture says, the anointed cherub who covers. Let us not rush past this title. This is not a poetic flourish. It is a technical, liturgical term. The cherubim, in the biblical imagination, are an order of angelic beings of the highest rank, whose primary function is to guard sacred space and the very presence of God. It was the cherubim who were placed at the east of the earthly Garden of Eden to guard the way to the tree of life. It was the images of two great cherubim, their wings overshadowing the mercy seat, that stood in the most holy place of the tabernacle and the temple. To be a cherub was to be a guardian of the holy, and Lucifer was not just any cherub. He was the anointed cherub, a title that speaks of a unique ordination, a special consecration for the highest of duties. And what was his duty? To cover. This is a direct reference to the function of the cherubim over the Ark of the Covenant, whose wings covered the place of atonement, the very spot where the presence of God would manifest. This is the calm before the storm. In the original, perfect order, Lucifer was the high priest of the heavenly sanctuary. His role was not to rule, but to guard. His function was to stand in the heart of the fiery stones on the holy mountain of God and to protect the sanctity of the divine presence. He was the chief steward of the most sacred place in all the universe. And it was this sacred trust, this high priestly calling, that he was about to betray. And now, with the evidence from Ezekiel laid bare, the unveiling fire of revelation illuminates the truth with a brilliant and undeniable clarity. The riddle is solved. There were two Edens, and they were not just in different locations, they were of two entirely different natures, created for two entirely different purposes. The first Eden, the heavenly Eden, was the one described in Ezekiel. It was a primordial, spiritual realm, the very administrative capital of the cosmos, situated on the holy mountain of God. Its substance was not soil and water, but light, fire, and precious stones. It was not a place of biological life, but of celestial government. And its chief steward was not a man, but the highest of all angelic beings, Lucifer, the anointed cherub. This was the original blueprint, the celestial archetype. The second Eden, the earthly Eden, was the one described in Genesis. It was a later, physical creation, a garden planted on the reclaimed soil of a post-judgment world. Its substance was dust, water, and organic life, trees, fruits, and animals. It was not a throne room, but a sanctuary, not a center of cosmic government, but a testing ground for a new kind of creature. And its chief steward was not a cherub, but a man, Adam, formed from the earth and given a priestly calling. This is the fire of the revelation. The two Edens are not the same place. One is the original, the other is the copy. One is the seat of cosmic power, the other is the incubator of human potential. One was the stage for the first, angelic fall. The other was the stage for the second, human fall. To understand this distinction is to understand that the entire drama of creation and rebellion is a story told in two acts, a tragedy that began in the heavens and then found its tragic echo on the earth. After the thunder of this revelation, a profound silence falls, the kind of silence that allows a paradigm-shifting truth to settle and rearrange the very furniture of our understanding. We can now see the entire story of the fall not as a single event, but as a grand cosmic tragedy in two acts, and this new perspective changes everything. Act 1 takes place in the pristine celestial theatre of the heavenly Eden. The protagonist is Lucifer, the anointed cherub, a being of unimaginable glory and wisdom. He is the guardian of the throne, the high priest of the cosmos. But his perfection becomes the seed of his downfall. Consumed by pride, he betrays his sacred trust, attempts to usurp the throne he was meant to guard, and in a great cosmic war, he is defeated and cast out. The first Eden is defiled not by an outside intruder, but by the treason of its own chief steward. Act 2 takes place on the newly restored stage of the earthly Eden. The protagonist is now Adam, a creature of dust and breath, the new steward, the new priest-king. And the antagonist is no longer just an internal pride, but an external one, the serpent, the very same fallen king who was exiled from the first Eden. And in a heartbreaking echo of the first tragedy, the second steward also fails. He too abdicates his post as guardian, allows the sanctuary to be defiled, and is cast out. This is the silence after the thunder. It is the moment we realize that the story of Adam and Eve is not the original story of the fall. It is an echo, a replay, a terrestrial reenactment of a much older and much larger celestial tragedy. The human fall was not the beginning of sin. It was humanity's tragic entry into a war that had already begun. The first ripple from this new understanding immediately clarifies one of the oldest and most perplexing questions in the Genesis narrative. Who was the serpent, and where did he come from? In the simplified one Eden story, the serpent appears as a sudden, unexplained intrusion of evil into a perfect world. He is an outside agitator, a chaotic element with no clear origin story. But in the two Eden framework, his identity and motive become chillingly clear. The serpent is not a random intruder. He is the deposed king of the first Eden, the celestial sanctuary. Having been cast out of his own glorious kingdom on the holy mountain of God, he now looks with a bitter and jealous rage upon the new earthly Eden that has been created, and upon the new steward Adam, who has been given the dominion that he lost. His presence in the garden is not a surprise attack. It is an act of counterinsurgency. He is a king in exile, attempting to sabotage the new administration that has been installed in his former territory. His goal is not simply to tempt a naive human. It is a strategic political move. If he can cause the new steward, Adam, to fall into the same kind of rebellion that he did, he can prove to God that the entire project of a physical creation and a human priesthood is a failure. He is not just a tempter, he is a rival king, attempting to recruit God's new subjects into his own shadow kingdom. The serpent in the garden is not the beginning of the story of evil. He is a refugee from an older, larger war, and he has brought that war to the shores of our world. This first ripple reframes the entire drama of the fall, not as a simple story of temptation, but as the first battle in a cosmic war for the dominion of planet Earth. The revelation of the two Edens allows us to decode the powerful symbolic language embedded in the very structure of the gardens. The most significant sign we must decode is the meaning of the tree of life, which existed in both the heavenly Eden and the earthly one. This is not a horticultural sign. It is a profound metaphysical one. In the heavenly Eden, the tree of life was the ultimate expression of the uncreated glory of God, the source of eternal, perpetual existence. It was the centerpiece of the sanctuary, the physical manifestation of immortality. Lucifer, as the chief guardian, enjoyed constant access to this source, a reflection of his own eternal status. When he sinned, he was immediately cut off from this core, spiritual reality, exiled from the source of eternal life. When God placed Adam in the earthly Eden, he also provided a tree of life. This was a physical counterpart, a sign that Adam, though mortal and made of dust, was given a choice to live forever and access divine sustenance. But the tree of life also served as a profound reminder of the previous greater fall. The ultimate tragedy is that Lucifer, who had lost the original tree of life in the celestial sanctuary, was driven by his rage to ensure that his successor, Adam, would also lose the copy in the earthly garden. The temptation was not primarily about the tree of knowledge, it was about preventing access to the tree of life. By luring Adam into disobedience, Lucifer achieved his objective. He ensured that humanity would share his own eternal fate of spiritual exile from the source of God's life. The tree of life, present in both Edens, is a sign that the tragedy of the human fall was a direct spiritual echo of the greater primordial angelic fall. But is there any further evidence for the existence of a complex, structured, and geographical heaven in the ancient texts? To corroborate the testimony of Ezekiel, we must once again call our star witness from the Forbidden Library, the prophet Enoch. The Book of Enoch does not just confirm the idea of a heavenly realm, it provides a detailed, multi-layered map of its geography, reinforcing the concept of the heavenly Eden as a real, physical location within the spiritual dimension. Enoch's visions, which he claims were shown to him by the archangel Uriel, do not describe a vague, ethereal heaven. He describes a cosmos with multiple distinct heavens or dimensions. He speaks of celestial storehouses for the snow and the hail. He describes the prisons for the fallen stars, the angelic rebels. And most significantly, he describes the ultimate destination of his journey, a great and glorious throne room, surrounded by fire, attended by cherubim and seraphim, situated in the highest heaven. This is not the language of abstract theology. It is the language of a cartographer, a traveler recounting the geography of a realm he has personally visited. Enoch's account of a highly organized, structured, and almost bureaucratic heaven, complete with governmental centers, prisons, and storehouses, aligns perfectly with Ezekiel's description of a heavenly Eden on the holy mountain of God. Both texts testify to a reality that is far more complex and far more physical in the spiritual sense than the simplified, cloud-filled heaven of popular imagination. The forgotten witness of Enoch confirms that the heavenly Eden was not a metaphor. It was the capital city of a very real and very ancient cosmic kingdom. With the reality of the two Edens now firmly established, a profound and heartbreaking cosmic thread, a divine pattern, becomes visible. It is the recurring tragic pattern of exile. The story of Adam and Eve being cast out of the earthly garden is not the original archetypal story of separation from God. It is a perfect human-scale reenactment of a much older, much larger, and much more catastrophic celestial exile. Let us trace the pattern. It begins with a created being, fashioned in perfection and given a position of immense honor and trust. This being is placed in a sacred space, a sanctuary, a place of direct communion with the Creator. They are given a commission, a sacred stewardship, and a single clear boundary that defines the limits of their authority. But in a moment of pride or disobedience, that boundary is crossed. The sacred trust is betrayed. The sanctuary is defiled. And the immediate, unalterable consequence is expulsion. The being is cast out from the sacred space, exiled from the presence of God, and the way back is forever barred by the sentinels of divine justice. This pattern fits the story of Lucifer perfectly. He was the anointed cherub, placed in the heavenly Eden on the holy mountain of God. His sin was pride, and his consequence was to be cast out, exiled from the heavens. And the pattern fits the story of Adam with a haunting precision. He was the human priest-king, placed in the earthly Eden. His sin was disobedience, and his consequence was to be cast out, exiled from the garden, with cherubim and a flaming sword now barring his return. The human fall is a tragic echo, a historical rhyme, a terrestrial replay of the celestial fall that preceded it. The story of Adam's exile is not just our story, it is a reflection of a much older cosmic sorrow. But the story of the Bible is not ultimately a story of exile, it is a story of return. The recurring pattern of being cast out of the sacred space is met with an even more powerful recurring pattern, God's relentless, multi-generational plan to bring humanity back into a restored Eden. The entire arc of Scripture, from Genesis chapter 3 to Revelation chapter 22, is the story of this great return journey. Consider the tabernacle that God commanded Moses to build in the wilderness. It was not just a tent for worship, it was a portable Eden. Its structure mirrored the geography of the garden. It had an outer court, a holy place, and a most holy place, just as Eden had its outer regions and its sacred center with the tree of life. The veil was embroidered with cherubim, a direct echo of the angelic guardians who barred the way back to the original garden. The tabernacle was a divinely engineered replica, a tangible promise that a way back into the presence of God was being made. Later, the great Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem was a more permanent and even more glorious iteration of this same pattern. It was a fixed architectural Eden, a place where heaven and earth were meant to meet. It was, in essence, an attempt to replant the garden on the holy mountain of Zion. And this pattern reaches its ultimate, breathtaking fulfillment in the final chapters of the book of Revelation. In the New Jerusalem, the Apostle John sees not a temple building, but the city itself as the temple. And in its center, flowing from the very throne of God and of the Lamb, is the river of the water of life. And on either side of the river stands the tree of life itself, its leaves for the healing of the nations. This is the final, perfect restoration. It is the merging of the heavenly Eden and the earthly Eden into a single, glorious and eternal reality where God and humanity will dwell together, and there will be no more exile. If the doctrine of the two Edens is so foundational, so critical to understanding the entire arc of rebellion and redemption, why was it forgotten? Why did the later church, in its creeds and councils, choose to bury this profound and beautiful cosmic geography under the weight of a simplified one-garden narrative? The answer, once again, lies in the intense theological battles of the early centuries of Christianity. The primary threat to the early church was not Roman persecution, but the internal seduction of Gnosticism. The Gnostics were Christian heretics who taught a complex, dualistic cosmology. They spoke of a high, good God who was utterly separate from the material world, and a lesser, often ignorant or evil deity, the demiurge, who had created the flawed physical universe. They described a complex hierarchy of heavens, eons, and spiritual beings, and taught that salvation was a matter of escaping the prison of the physical body through secret knowledge, or gnosis. In this high-stakes environment, the ancient Hebrew tradition of a multi-layered heaven, of a divine council, and of two distinct Edens began to sound dangerously similar to the Gnostic heresies. The Church Fathers, in their righteous and necessary fight to defend the goodness of the physical creation and the singularity of the one true God, made a strategic, pastoral decision. They chose to simplify. They began to de-emphasize the complex cosmology of the ancient texts. They flattened the multidimensional universe of the prophets into a simpler, three-tiered model of heaven, earth, and hell. And in this great simplification, the profound and nuanced distinction between the heavenly Eden of Ezekiel and the earthly Eden of Genesis was one of the first casualties. It was theologically safer to speak of only one Eden than to risk having their doctrine confused with the complex pantheons of the Gnostics. It was not a malicious act of deception, but a pragmatic choice to sacrifice a complex truth for the sake of a defensible doctrine. And in that choice, the Church forgot a piece of its own deepest history. The legacy of this forgotten geography is not just a matter of ancient history. The echo of the two Edens and the war that was fought over them resonates in our present spiritual reality. For the conflict that began in the heavens and was replayed on earth was always a war for territory. It was a war for sacred space. Lucifer, in his rebellion, sought to seize control of the ultimate sacred space, the holy mountain of God. Having failed, he then turned his attention to the new earthly sacred space, the Garden of Eden. His goal was to defile it, to corrupt its steward, and to claim it for his own shadow kingdom. The entire history of spiritual warfare can be understood as this ongoing conflict over sacred territory. This is the echo in the present. Your life, your heart, your home, your church. These are all potential outposts of the kingdom of God. Small pockets of reclaimed Edenic territory in a world that still lives under the influence of its exiled, rebel king. Every time you create a space dedicated to prayer, to worship, to holiness, you are not just performing a religious activity, you are engaging in an act of spiritual warfare. You are planting the flag of the kingdom of heaven on contested ground. Conversely, every time we allow sin, chaos, and defilement to enter these sacred spaces, we are doing the very thing Adam did. We are abdicating our post as guardians and allowing the enemy to gain a foothold. The war for territory is not something that happens in a distant land. It is happening right now in the geography of your own soul. The question is not whether the war is real, but which side is gaining ground in the territory that has been entrusted to you. And so, this grand cosmic story of two Edens, of celestial palaces and primordial gardens, finally comes to rest in a sacred mirror held up to your own life. You too have been given a garden. It may not be a paradise of pristine rivers and perfect trees, but it is a sacred space nonetheless. It is the territory of your own soul, the inner landscape of your heart and mind. It is your family. It is your calling. It is the unique sphere of influence that God has entrusted to your stewardship. This is your Eden, and like Adam, you have been commissioned to be its priest and its guardian. You are called to cultivate the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience. You are called to walk in communion with God in the cool of the day, in the quiet moments of prayer and reflection. And you are called to be a vigilant guardian, to stand at the gate of your heart, and to protect this sacred space from the subtle, whispering voice of the serpent. The story of the two Edens is a profound reminder that the sacred space you have been given is precious and that there is an ancient, jealous enemy who desires to see it defiled. The mirror asks you a piercing question. Are you tending to your garden? Are you cultivating holiness, uprooting the weeds of bitterness and pride? Or have you, like Adam, become a passive and silent observer, allowing the intruder to speak unchallenged, to question the goodness of your Creator, and to offer you a fruit that promises wisdom but delivers only exile? Your garden is your responsibility. The choice to be its faithful guardian is yours to make every single day. The story of the two Edens presents us with a history of two tragic failures. In the celestial garden, the highest of angels fell through pride. In the terrestrial garden, the first of men fell through disobedience. Both stories end in exile, with the way back to the tree of life barred by the unyielding justice of God. If the story ended there, it would be a story of utter despair. But it does not. For there is a third garden in the biblical narrative, a garden not of pristine perfection, but of agonizing, blood-soaked prayer. It is the Garden of Gethsemane. And in that garden, a second Adam, a final priest-king, faced his own crossroads of choice. Like the first Adam, he was faced with a tree, not a tree of forbidden fruit, but the rough, terrible tree of the cross. Like the first Adam, he was faced with a divine command, not a simple prohibition, but the crushing weight of drinking the cup of God's wrath for the sins of the world. And in that moment of ultimate testing, where the first Adam chose his own will, the second Adam made a different choice. Not my will, he prayed, but yours be done. This is the crossroads of choice. The obedience of the second Adam in the Garden of Gethsemane was the act that reversed the disobedience of the first Adam in the Garden of Eden. His willing sacrifice was the key that unlocked the gate that had been barred by the cherubim's flaming sword. His victory in that garden of agony is the victory that offers us a way back, not just to a restored earthly paradise, but to the ultimate heavenly Eden, to the very presence of God from which we were exiled. The pattern of failure has been broken. The choice before you now is not whether to repeat Adam's failure, but whether you will accept the victory of the one who succeeded where he fell. The excavation of the two Edens, the celestial and the terrestrial, is not the end of a story. It is the key that unlocks an entire library of forgotten truths. Understanding this foundational geography of the cosmos is the necessary first step to understanding the full scope of the cosmic war, the nature of the adversary, and the profound multi-layered beauty of God's plan of restoration. If this journey has stirred a hunger in your spirit, if it has ignited a passion to see the scriptures not as a flat, two-dimensional text, but as a deep and complex reality, then this is your invitation. This is not just a channel, it is a community of spiritual archaeologists, of seekers who are no longer content with the simplified stories and are willing to face the awesome and often terrifying complexity of the truth. The story of the two Edens is the beginning. From here, the trail leads to the lost history of the pre-Adamic civilization, to the forgotten flood of Lucifer, and to the secret of the divine council that witnessed the first creation. Share what this revelation of the two Edens has unveiled for you in the comments below. Your questions and your insights are a vital part of this collective work of remembrance, and be ready. For the gatekeepers may have forgotten this truth, but the scriptures have not. The keys to the other locked rooms are waiting. Our journey into the forbidden geography of our faith has only just begun.